In this video, I'd like to show you how to use the xamTimeLine control to plot some date-time series data. So you notice here I have a timeline here and I've got it labeled as today's schedule, getting up at 5:30, work on a priority item here before we maybe do some email or something, and then I can scroll through, and then at 7:15 I've got to get an oil change, and then maybe check the transmission at 9:15. Now what's nice about this control is you'll see that these little dots down here on the bottom show you where each of the items in the timeline are, and I can also move the zoom capability here so I can see them all at one time as well. Getting this set up is quite easy, so let me open up Visual Studio and I'll show you how it's done. The first thing that I wanted to do was create a model for the data that's bound to the timeline. So here's just a simple class here that is the timeline data, and the members for it, as you can see, are time, duration, title, and details. So that's the simple model that we'll work with, and then the view model that comes into play simply builds up an observable collection of the timeline data. And we'll skip the data title here for a second and come down here, and it's just lazy initialize to add in a number of different items that to show up on the timeline. And so once that's built up, we'll just return that instance and kind of go on from there. The only other property I have within the view model is the data title, and this gives a title to the series of data that shows up within the timeline. So now let's take a look at the markup for the view, and it's pretty basic. So as always, we need to bring in the correct namespace. So you'll see that we have infragistics.controls.timelines, and then I also brought in the namespace for my view model, and that's just the project name, views, and then timeline. So I'm creating the view model right here at this point and setting the layout route with the data context to the view model so it's available. So we need to create an axis and also a series. So within the series, we're setting the data source equal to the data property within the view model. And then also the title is being set to the data title property there as well. Once you set the data source, that's fine, but not always will your model come through in the same format that the timeline needs to know. And instead of forcing you of implementing a particular type of object to provide as the data source to this control, it's able to accept a data mapping. So in this case, everything's named exactly the same, but perhaps you have your property name as event time or an event title and on down the line. So with the data mapping set up, what comes first is the property for the control, and you set that equal to the property coming in from your model, and then you can map any incoming data, for the control that comes into it in order so that it maps correctly. And then with the axis here, I just set up some basic things, setting the scroll position in a certain area and a certain size within the scale, and then whether or not we're showing the thumb items. And so let's go ahead and run this and you can see how it all works together again. So there's the timeline. Again, I can zoom out. I can zoom in. I can use the arrows to jump to certain intervals on the timeline. And I can use the points here to click and go directly to each item and scroll through it. And right up here you'll see is where I created the series title that says today's schedule. And that's getting you started with the xamTimeLine control.
Infragistics. On the web at infragistics.com.